Starting today, we're going to talk about different market structures, and the first one is perfect competition. A competitive market has some interesting and important features. So one of the conditions of a competitive market is that there should be many buyers and sellers, right? A lot of small players in the game. There should be no product differentiation, which means that the firms have homogeneous products, okay? So they offer pretty much the same thing. It's identical. You cannot distinguish yourself from anyone else. There should be no barriers to entry, which means that the firms can freely enter or exit the market in the long run. This is quite important, as we're going to see later. So the idea is that if a certain industry is very profitable, then other firms, new firms, can easily enter. And if it's unprofitable, then the existing firms should be able to exit without having any barriers to that. Another condition is transparency, which is also called perfect information. So what it means is that the consumers must have information about the prices charged and the nature of the product sold. So if there is that kind of transparency, then you can't really play a trick on them. All right. Think of all of the online reviews, right? That's written on products. That creates a lot of transparency. So that's actually a good thing. It can improve the choices that are made. When you put all of these things together, what it means is that every buyer and every seller is a price taker. Okay, so price taker means that you just have to follow the price that's out there. So everyone has to follow the market price, and the market price is determined by the interaction of all the buyers and sellers. All right, each individual is way too small to influence the market price. Okay, so the market price is just determined by everyone, and you have to follow that. All right, you follow the market price, which is based on the interaction of everyone, or else, or else what? If you don't follow the market price, then you are toast. Yeah, so that's the idea. Think of this. Let's say, imagine a competitive market where you are selling something which everybody else is also selling, and you're just a small person among them all, right? If you raise your price, if you want to charge a higher price, well, the buyers are going to go to the other sellers. They can easily substitute away, right? So in that sense, you're going to be toast, right? And if you're a buyer and if you don't want to buy at that price, well, there are so many other buyers. So the seller doesn't really depend on you, and the buyer doesn't depend on the seller, right? So both ways, you just have to follow what the market determines. Firms in a competitive market can alter their output, which is quantity, but they have no influence over the market price. So their choice is over the output, not the price. By the way, this is quite idealistic. It's theoretical. It's hard to come up with a real-world example of a perfectly competitive market. Okay, there are some approximations to it, like street food sellers, which were, if you go to, for instance, New York and you see the hot dog stands and things like that, or even in Toronto, but still there are limitations to it. All right. When I was taking micro, our teacher said that if anyone can give me an example of a perfectly competitive market, I would give them an A. Okay, because it doesn't really exist. One market which kind of comes close to it is the blood market. There are many people who can offer blood, and it's the same quality. But even that, first of all, we don't have a blood market, and I think part of it is because it wouldn't work. And also the quality of the blood isn't always the same. I mean, you don't want to get blood with HIV or something like that. Oh no. Yeah, so take down some notes. A competitive firm is a small producer among many others. It has no impact on the market price. You take it or leave it. And that's the meaning of being a price taker. Price taker means take it or leave it. You don't determine it. Each firm faces a perfectly elastic demand. Do you remember elasticity? Elasticity is flexibility or responsiveness. So perfectly elastic demand means that there's a lot of substitutes, right? And that's the whole point of competition, right? There are other competitors who can offer the same thing that you are offering. So there are many substitutes and competitors. So being a competitive firm means being one fish among many others, and all those fish are pretty much the same. But marginal cost is rising due to diminishing marginal returns, right? So this is something you've seen before. If you remember, we had this lawnmower example. If you keep adding more and more workers, then what happens is that your production is not going to increase as much as before, right? So that's the idea of diminishing marginal returns. Something else that you've seen before is the profit formula. Profit is total revenue minus total cost, and total revenue is price times quantity, P times Q. Okay, so we can come up with the average revenue, and the average formula is something, again, you've seen before. Whenever you have the average of something, you take the total value and you divide it by the amount of output, or the quantity. So here what you have is total revenue divided by the quantity, and total revenue is P times Q. So if you divide, then the quantities are going to cancel out. So what you get is just P, right? So that's something useful. Average revenue is the same as price, and that's always true. So for all firms and all markets, we're going to have some other formulas which don't work all the time, but this one applies all the time. So pause here and write down your notes and the formulas. Another concept that you've seen before is this idea of marginal. You've seen marginal cost. Now we're going to talk about marginal revenue. And the concept is the same. It's the increase in total revenue due to an extra unit of output. It's how much your revenue increases if you produce an additional unit. Again, these words that are underlined, this is to capture the idea of marginal. Marginal means one more unit, an additional unit. Okay, so the formula is change in total revenue. This delta is change over change in quantity, and quantity is your output, and total revenue is price times quantity. Now the thing is, in a competitive market, remember, the price is determined by the market. So the price is exogenous. It's constant, right? It doesn't change by the firm's operation. Each firm is such a small player that it's not going to affect the price. Okay, and if that's fixed, what happens is that the quantities can cancel out and you get marginal revenue equals price. Those of you who've done calculus, you would know that this delta is the same as a derivative. So if you do the derivative of revenue over quantity, what you get is actually this, assuming that the price is a constant. Okay, this is a useful formula, but it's only applicable to a competitive market. Okay, so marginal revenue is the same as price in a competitive market. And a firm's objective is to maximize profit. All right, so that's kind of intuitive, yeah. And the profit we know is total revenue minus total cost. The condition to maximize profit is when marginal revenue equals marginal cost. Okay, so that's an extremely useful formula, and we're going to use this a lot in the course. All right, so that's applicable to all firms and all markets. So it's kind of universal. We always have marginal revenue equal marginal cost. That's a condition to be met, and we're going to do a lot of practice. So you're going to get a lot of questions where you have to follow this procedure. Okay, so pause here and write down your notes. That was scary. All right, so a distinction to make between shutdown and exit. All right, these are kind of special terms in economics. In everyday language, a lot of times we use shutdown and exit interchangeably, but let's be accurate. When we talk about shutdown, what we mean is when the firm stops production in the short run, which means that the firm still has to pay fixed costs like rent and property tax, but they won't have any variable costs. Okay. So it's kind of like when they're under maintenance, they still have to pay their rent, right? But they're not producing anything. Exit is when they completely exit the market, all right? So there are no fixed costs anymore. So in other words, short run and long run, just to remind you, is the difference between them is that is flexibility. Short run is less flexible, long run is more flexible. And you saw that in elasticity also. Things are more elastic in the long run because you give them time to adapt and change. Okay, so in the short run, there's a fixed number of sellers. There's no entry and exit. In the long run, there's freedom of entry and exit. Okay, so the doors are open. Pause here. You can think of shutdown as pressing the pause button. That's what it is. And here we are talking about the short run, and short run is where you have to pay the fixed costs. You can't avoid fixed costs, but you can avoid variable costs if you want, right? So the focus is on whether or not to incur the variable costs. Now let's see what happens if the firm shuts down. If they shut down, then the revenue, they're not making anything, right? They're not producing any output, so the revenue is going to be zero. What's going to be the cost? The total cost? Well, because it's in the short run and you still have to pay the fixed cost, that's going to be part of your cost, even if you're not making anything. All right. Now, if you put those things together, you get a profit of 0 minus fixed cost, which is negative fixed cost. So you have a negative profit. The negative profit is the same as a loss. Okay. It's better to keep producing, which means not shutting down, as long as the firm can cover some of its fixed cost, even if the profit is negative. So let's say the fixed cost is 100, right? If you shut down, you're going to have negative 100 profit, right? In other words, 100 loss, right? As long as your profit can be a little bit higher than negative 100, let's say negative 50 or negative 20 or maybe 0 or something positive, then all of that is preferred to losing negative or to losing 100. Okay, so as long as the profit is greater than negative fixed cost, then it's better to operate. As long as total revenue is greater than variable cost. So the firm is covering its variable costs and has some leftover revenue to cover part of its fixed costs. Okay, so that's the condition where it's better to operate. That's the condition where you don't shut down. But if the total revenue is less than variable costs, it means that the firm can't pay for its operating costs. So it's better to shut down. In other words, we are talking about a scenario where you're stuck with the fixed cost. You don't have a choice there. So you're already paying a fixed cost. If you also can't cover your variable cost, then why bother, right? I mean, you're just sinking down into loss. So if your total revenue is very low, if it's less than your variable cost, then you just shut down. So the shutdown condition is whenever your total revenue is less than variable cost. We're going to simplify this to make it easier. If you remember, total revenue is the same as price times quantity, and variable cost we can say is the same as average variable cost times quantity. Okay, so we're kind of coming up with this average variable cost times quantity so that we can cancel out the two quantities. Okay, so what you get is whenever the price is less than average variable cost, then you shut down. Okay, so that's the condition. Pause here and write down. So the decision is if your price is less than average variable cost, then it's better to shut down. So the quantity is going to be 0. What if the price is greater than average variable cost? Then the idea that you don't shut down, right? So you operate. So how much do you produce? Well, you produce based on that condition that we had. That you said marginal revenue equal marginal cost, right? So that's how you determine your optimal quantity. Produce as long as the price you get, which is the marginal revenue, covers the cost of producing an extra unit, marginal cost. Produce as long as the price rises at the same pace as the marginal cost. Okay, so if the price is rising faster than the marginal cost, then that's good, and you keep producing more. And at some point they're going to level off, and that's where you stop, right? So that's the idea here. You don't want to produce at a point where your price is rising slower than your marginal cost. The supply curve of a competitive firm in the short run is a part of its marginal cost curve that is higher than the average variable cost. This is based on what we just did, and we just want to graph it. Okay, so this is a useful graph, and make sure you copy a neat one for yourself. The average variable cost usually has this U shape or the hockey stick shape, and the marginal cost slopes upward because of diminishing returns. Notice this part that's at the 0. This is because the price is too low, that it doesn't cover average variable cost, so the quantity stays at 0. When you do your own copy, also label your vertical axis So the vertical axis should be either price or cost. So you can write price or cost there. Sunk cost. This is an extremely important concept and it has a lot of implications in everyday life, so you can actually use it. So let's look at this cartoon. I'm a man of my word. Once I've made the wrong decision, I stick to it. Yeah. So this is called the sunk cost fallacy. There's a problem here, and the problem is that sometimes there is a cost which has been committed, and it cannot be recovered. Okay, there are certain decisions that, you know, once you make it, it's over, right? You just have to move on, right? You can't stick to it. You can say that, you know, because I made that decision, then I am going to continue being in the same mistake, right? That's not a rational thing to do. Sometimes things stop being an opportunity cost, right? So you don't have the choice anymore. It's gone. It's over. Once it's done, it's gone. So you might have heard of this expression, don't cry over spilled milk, right? Certain things are spilled milk. You know, you made a decision in the past. Well, whether it was right or wrong or whatever, well, keep moving on. Let bygones be bygones, right? So these are different expressions that convey this idea of sunk cost. You don't have to eat a bad egg to the end. This is attributed to Abraham Lincoln. It's an interesting quote. So here's the thing. Let's say you go to the store and you buy an egg, right? And let's, for argument's sake, let's say you can't return it, right? They have no return policy. So you come home with your egg and you open it or you cook it and you realize that it's a bad egg, okay? What do? You have two choices. One choice is to say that, oh, I paid for this egg, so I'm going to eat it to the end. Well, okay, eat it to the end and you're going to die. Or you can say, okay, at this point, the best thing I can do is just to throw it away. I don't have to eat the egg to the end just because I paid for it, right? So that's the concept here. If you find yourself in a hole, stop digging. You certainly shouldn't dig faster, no matter how much you paid for your shovel. Yeah? So even if you have an expensive shovel, doesn't mean that you have to dig a hole for yourself, right? So rational people think at the margin, right? This idea of margin means your next step. So wow, that's cool. What choices do I have right now, regardless of what happened before? So that's the idea of making decisions at the margin. So write this down. You don't have to write down the quotes, but write down the rest. And overall, the concept is quite useful and important. Wow, that was nice. So we talked about the short-run decision to shut down or not shut down. Now we are talking about the long-run decision of exit, right? So exit means you sell off everything and you don't have any more costs whatsoever. So if the firm exits, its revenue is going to be zero because they don't produce anything. And its costs will also be zero because in the long run, it's long run enough so that you can sell off everything and everything is flexible. Okay, so the profit is gonna be simply 0 minus 0, which is 0. All right, so in the long run, if the firm's profit is negative, which is less than 0, then it's better to exit. Okay, this idea that the profit is less than 0, if you rearrange this using the total revenue and total cost, what you get is total revenue is being less than total cost. Okay, so if that's the condition, then you exit. And total revenue, we know, is the same as price times quantity, and total cost is the same as average total cost times quantity. Again, we're gonna make up this thing because we want to get rid of this quantity. All right, so we can simplify. And our exit condition would be whenever the price is less than average total cost, then you exit. One thing here, there are a lot of these abbreviations here. If you find them confusing, then write out the whole thing. Okay, it's okay. You can write out a sentence. Okay, that's fine. Just as long as it makes sense to you. I thought that abbreviations are a bit shorter and easier to write, but if you find them confusing, then write out the whole thing. One of the important conditions of a perfectly competitive market is that there's freedom of entry and exit. So new firms can enter and old firms can exit in the long run. Okay, so let's look at a situation where the price is greater than average total cost. Okay, now we already know that when the price is greater than average total cost, it means that the total revenue is more than total cost, which means that the profit is positive, right? So the firms are making positive profit. Okay, this is a signal. It signals new producers to enter the market. It's kind of like you have an industry which is evolving, which is very prosperous, while new firms are going to be attracted to it. What's going to happen when new producers come into a market? What's going to happen to the supply? What happens is that you're going to have more producers, so the supply increases, and in the graph, you would shift the supply curve to the right, yeah? So that's always when you have an increase. If the supply goes to the right, what's going to happen to the market price? You can imagine it for yourself. You can do a little sketch, do a supply and demand, shift your supply to the right, then the equilibrium price is going to drop, okay? And that's kind of intuitive. You have more of something, then the price of it goes down. Now, as the price goes down, at some point, the price is going to hit your average total cost. So initially, the price is pretty high. It's above average total cost. But because the price goes down due to high production, then at some point, it's going to reach your average total cost. And when the price equals average total cost, then the profit becomes zero, because total revenue will be equal to total cost. So this industry is not lucrative anymore. It doesn't give that signal anymore that, yeah, you know, come on in, make more production and whatever, because the profit is now zero. So the new firms stop entering. Okay. What about the opposite case? If the price is less than average total cost, it means that the total revenue is less than total cost. So the profit is negative. Yeah, the firms are making a loss, which is a negative profit. So what kind of a signal does it give? Is it attractive to enter this market? Well, if there is negative profit, then maybe you should leave, right? So in the long run, some firms will start exiting the market. And what happens when firms exit the market? What happens to the total production? The supply is going to reduce, so the curve is going to shift to the left. And if you shift the supply curve to the left, the price goes up. Yeah. And as the price goes up, at some point, it's going to reach average total cost. So initially, the price was pretty low. As the firms keep leaving the industry, then the price is going to catch up with the average total cost. And that's where your profit becomes zero again. And that's when firms would stop exiting. So it doesn't signal them to exit anymore. All right. The moral of the story is, in a competitive market, firms always make zero economic profits in the long run. All right, so that's an important lesson, and it's really because of entry and exit. So if they don't make zero profit, then there's going to be some entry or exit. All right, now you might be like, hang on, well, what's the point of it? I mean, if at the end of the day I'm going to make zero profit, then why bother, right? What's all the fuss about? Well, remember the difference between economic profit and accounting profit, or economic cost and accounting cost, right? Economic cost includes the cost of everything, including a normal return or a normal profit. All right, so it already compensates the firm's owner for the risks and other efforts put into the business. So that's the entrepreneurship resource that's already covered. So zero economic profit is not such a bad idea. It doesn't mean that everything is, you know, just pointless. So pause here. Let's graph the long-run market supply of a perfectly competitive industry. So we're going to have our good old price and quantity, and the important curve here is the average total cost. That's going to like what determines where the supply is going to be. The supply curve is going to be flat at the minimum of the average total cost. So when the price is at the minimum of average total cost, and we already know that the profit is going to be zero, so there's no more pie left in the plate, right? So that's going to be in the long run situation. Again, now this can get out of hand, so you're like, oh no, what's going on? I'm still lost. The important thing here is for you to understand the logic. All right, and the logic is straightforward. The logic is that if the price is above your cost, then there's going to be positive profit. And if there's positive profit, it attracts new producers. And as there's no new producers coming, then the profit is going to go down, right? That's why we get negative. That's why we get the zero profit, right? If the price is below your cost, then you have negative profit. So some firms are going to leave, and as they leave, then the price for others is going to increase. So at the end of the day, we are going to end up at a point where you have zero profit, okay, where the price equals minimum of the average total cost, which gives you, total revenue equal total cost. Wow, that was cool. All right. If you remember, one of the conditions of perfect competition is transparency, is perfect information, right? One example of the opposite of that would be asymmetric information. And that's when one party has more information about a transaction than the other side. So this can be problematic, all right? And there are two concepts here which are used a lot in insurance, and you're going to see them a lot. And so it's useful to know what they are and their applications. One of them is called moral hazard. Moral hazard is the risk of irresponsible behavior because its cost would fall on the other side. So for instance, not taking care of yourself since you're insured, right? So let's say you get this nice tuxedo and you don't mind spilling on it because you know that it's insured, all right? Another example your book gives is some people may not shovel the snow in front of their home because they know that if the mailman falls and breaks his leg, then their insurance is going to cover, right? Now that's problematic. That's very irresponsible because the poor mailman and the insurance company have to bear the cost of someone else, okay? So that's not efficient because it bears cost on other people. Now here when we say hazard, hazard means risk, okay? So hazardous means risky, and the term moral refers to the idea of irresponsible behavior, okay? So when we say moral hazard, it means the risk of immorality, basically. Another concept which is also used a lot is adverse selection. So that is a low quality option is offered in transaction. All right, that's called adverse selection. Like what? One example of that would be in the case of life insurance. Those who are more at risk are more likely to purchase insurance. Yeah, and that kind of makes sense. I mean, if somebody has a health problem, they're more likely to go get the insurance. Now, the problem is that the insurer is unaware of the personal risks. The insurer doesn't exactly know what's the level of risk-taking of each person and what is the medical condition of each person. Sometimes they require medical tests, but still it's unlikely for them to know exactly everything that the person knows about themselves. Each person knows themselves better than the other side. So they can kind of take advantage of it. Those people who go get life insurance tend to be needy of it more than others. So when we say adverse, adverse means low quality. Okay, low quality in one way or another. And selection refers to the option, the level of option. So adverse selection means being offered or offering a low quality option. Another example, this is kind of cool. Car owners are more likely to sell their car if it's a lemon, which means a car with a major defect. And this was a term coined by George Akerlof, who won the Nobel Prize. Basically, lemon means a problematic car. Think of it like this. Those who sell, if you have a used car which is very good, you're unlikely to sell it, right? Those who sell their cars it's very likely that their car has some major problem, okay? Wow, that's cool. So cars lose value rapidly because buyers suspect that it's a lemon, right? So the reason why used cars lose value so much is because the buyers are always suspicious that, hang on, why is it that this guy wants to sell off their car, right? Maybe there is something wrong with them. Right? The owner of the car would know, but the other side doesn't know. Okay, so that's kind of reflected in the lower cost of the used cars. All right. Now again, the problem here is that these things are causes of inefficiency. Inefficiency means that the resources are not used where they are valued the most. So you might want to write this down. Inefficiency is a case where the resources are not used where they're valued the most. Okay. If you can get away with something for free, if you can cheat the system, that's not efficient, right? Because you are imposing a cost on someone else without paying for it, all right? So write this down, and again, we're going to come back to this later.